I'm the police chief. I came home to find my disabled daughter chained to her wheelchair by our HOA president. But when I arrested her, I got a threatening text: there will be consequences if you push this forward. Now I have to decide if I'll back down, or uncover the conspiracy behind this threat. I never thought I'd be standing in my own driveway, watching something so unbelievable unfold in front of me that I had to remind myself it was actually real. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because I just finished a late shift at the station, and all I wanted was to get home, kick off my boots, and spend some quiet time with my daughter, Maya. She's 17 now. High school junior. She has cerebral palsy, which affects her mobility and means she needs mobility assistance and sometimes uses a wheelchair or walker depending on the day. The neighbors know this. Or at least, they should. When I pulled into the driveway, something felt off immediately. The house was too quiet. Maya usually has music playing or a show on in the background. Our dog, Lucy, wasn't barking at the sound of my car like she always does. I walked around to the back porch, where Maya likes to spend time on nice days, sitting in the fresh air with her laptop and sketchbook. She's an incredible artist. That's when I saw it. My daughter was sitting in her wheelchair, and around her waist, through one of the armrests of the chair, was a thick chain. A heavy-duty padlock was keeping it secured. For a moment, the world stopped. I couldn't breathe. Everything I'd learned in 23 years as a police officer, all that training about staying calm, about assessing situations rationally, none of it mattered. All I saw was my child, locked up like an animal on her own porch. I ran over to her immediately. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely ask her what had happened. She started crying, and through her tears, she explained everything. About 2 hours earlier, Deborah Sinclair from 3 doors down had come to the house. Deborah is the HOA president. She's been on this power trip for months now, sending out violation notices about everything. The grass is too tall, the mailbox is the wrong shade of brown, the garden hose shouldn't be visible from the street. It's ridiculous. Complete overreach. The thing about Maya is that she's very independent-minded despite her mobility challenges. She loves being outside. And on nice days, I let her spend time on the back porch unsupervised. She can call me if she needs anything, and she has her phone with her. But apparently, Deborah didn't appreciate how the wheelchair ramp I built for Maya looked. According to her, it was an unapproved structure that violates HOA aesthetic guidelines. When I wasn't home, Deborah had the audacity to approach Maya alone on the porch. She demanded that Maya move her wheelchair inside. When Maya, rightfully confused and uncomfortable, refused to move, Deborah got angry. That's when she did something I still can't fully wrap my head around. She went home, got a chain and a padlock from her garage, and came back. She told Maya she was going to keep her out here until her father learned to follow the rules. She physically wrapped that chain around my daughter's wheelchair and locked it. My 16-year-old daughter. Locked to her own chair. On her own property. By this woman. I had to sit down. I felt dizzy. My hands were still shaking, and there was this red-hot sensation climbing up my chest, a kind of anger I've only experienced a handful of times in my life. I got the bolt cutters from the garage and freed Maya from that chain. I held her while she cried, and I kept telling her it was going to be okay, that nothing like this was ever going to happen again. But even as I was comforting her, my mind was racing. The police officer part of me, the part that enforces the law every single day, was already cataloging what had just happened. Unlawful restraint. False imprisonment. Potentially harassment and intimidation of a minor. And the worst part? The victim in this case was my own daughter. I got Maya settled inside with a glass of water and made sure she felt safe. Then I did something I've never done in my entire career. I put on my uniform. The one I wear to work. The one that still has my badge on it, with my name and my rank. Police chief. Deborah Sinclair had no idea. All this time, all those months of her power tripping around the neighborhood, sending out her ridiculous violation notices, threatening neighbors, and now this, she had no idea who she was messing with. Or maybe I should say, she was about to find out. I looked at myself in the mirror before I left. I looked angry. I looked like someone who had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And I was about to make sure that Deborah understood exactly what line she had crossed. I walked out to my driveway and got into my patrol car. The official one, not my personal vehicle. Some might say that was a statement in itself, but I wasn't trying to be subtle. I wasn't trying to be intimidating. I was doing my job. Because what happened to Maya wasn't just a personal violation. It was a crime. And crimes have consequences. I drove the 3 houses down to Deborah's place. The white picket fence, the perfectly manicured lawn, the pristine landscaping that seemed to matter more to her than actual human decency. I pulled into her driveway slowly, deliberately. I turned off the engine and just sat there for a moment. Through her front window, I could see her moving around in her living room. She hadn't heard the car pull up yet. She didn't know what was coming. I stepped out of the patrol car, adjusted my uniform, and walked up to her front door. I rang the doorbell. It took her about 30 seconds to answer, and when she opened that door, I watched her face go through about 5 different emotions in as many seconds. Recognition. Confusion. And then, finally, the dawning realization of who I was. She started to say something, to make some excuse or explanation, but I held up my hand. Deborah Sinclair, I said, keeping my voice level and professional, even though inside I was still absolutely furious, we need to talk about what you did to my daughter this afternoon. The color drained completely from her face. Your daughter, she stammered. I don't know what you're. I'm not going to stand here and listen to you deny it, I said. You restrained a minor. You locked her to her wheelchair. You kept her imprisoned on her own property against her will. Do you understand what you've done? Deborah started backpedaling, literally stepping backward into her house. It wasn't like that, she tried to explain. She wouldn't follow the rules, and I was just trying to. Trying to what? I interrupted. Trying to what, exactly? She had no good answer. Because there is no good answer. There is no explanation, no justification, no scenario where what she did was acceptable. I could see the fear in her eyes now. Not fear of me as a person, but fear of the badge. Fear of what it meant that the person standing on her doorstep, calmly informing her of her crimes, was the police chief. And for the first time, I saw something flicker across her face, some tiny spark of understanding that her little power games within the HOA were nothing compared to actual legal consequences. I took a step closer. You have the right to remain silent, I began, and I watched her face go even paler. Because Deborah Sinclair was about to learn a very hard lesson about what happens when you cross the line from petty tyranny to actual crime. She was about to learn that being the HOA president doesn't give you authority over actual people. And she was about to find out exactly what it means to face someone who actually does have authority, someone whose daughter she had violated. Deborah's lips were trembling as I read her Miranda rights right there on her doorstep. I could see her trying to process what was happening. She kept opening her mouth and closing it again, like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Maybe she was thinking back through all those months of her power trip, wondering exactly where the line had been that she'd crossed. I wasn't being theatrical. I wasn't standing there in my uniform trying to intimidate her for the sake of it. I was doing my job as a police officer who had just learned that a crime had been committed against a minor. That the victim happened to be my daughter was irrelevant to the facts. The facts were the facts. Do you understand your rights? I asked, keeping my voice steady and professional. She nodded, but she didn't speak. Smart move, honestly. At that point, anything she said could only make things worse. I'm going to need you to come down to the station, I said. We're going to go through exactly what happened this afternoon, and you're going to explain your actions to me and to the detectives who will be interviewing you. But I didn't, she started, and then she stopped herself. Good instinct. Too little, too late, but at least she had some sense of self-preservation. I called for a unit to come pick her up. I didn't arrest her right there, she wasn't a flight risk, and technically, I wanted to give her the chance to cooperate. But I made it clear that she needed to come with me. The patrol car that arrived was driven by Officer Sarah Chen, one of my best. I saw the recognition on Chen's face when she understood what was happening. "Chief," she said, meeting my eyes with a question. "Officer Chen, this is Deborah Sinclair," I said, gesturing toward her. "She's going to come downtown with us. We'll process her there." Deborah got into the back of the patrol car with Chen, and I watched them pull away before I walked back to my own vehicle. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, and what was left was just a deep, bone-aching exhaustion mixed with residual rage. I had to go back home and check on Maya. That was the priority. Everything else, the interrogation, the paperwork, the legal proceedings that were about to unfold, all of that could wait until I knew my daughter was okay. When I got back, I found Maya sitting in the kitchen with my sister, Rebecca, who must have arrived not long after I left. She'd brought Maya a cup of tea and they were sitting in silence, which told me everything I needed to know about the emotional state of the house. Rebecca looked up at me with a mixture of concern and something close to rage. She knows Maya almost as well as I do. She'd helped raise her after Maya's mother passed away when Maya was only 4 years old. Rebecca is the closest thing Maya has to a second parent. "Is it handled?" Rebecca asked. "She's at the station," I said. "I'm going to need to head back there in a bit to start the official process. But first, I need to make sure you're okay," I said, looking at Maya. Maya looked smaller somehow, sitting at that kitchen table. Vulnerable in a way that broke my heart all over again. She'd always been so brave, so fierce in her independence despite everything she had to deal with physically. But what had happened today, being restrained, being imprisoned in her own space by someone she'd barely interacted with, it had rattled something in her. "I'm okay," she said, but her voice was quiet. I don't understand why she did that. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just sitting on the porch like I always do." "You weren't doing anything wrong," I said firmly, sitting down across from her. "Not a single thing. This was about her. It was about her need to control things and her abuse of power. This wasn't your fault." "I know," Maya said, and I could hear the tears starting to come back into her voice. "I know that intellectually. But it feels like I did something to deserve it. That's the thing about being a victim. Even when you know logically that you didn't do anything wrong, there's this part of you that tries to rationalize what happened. Tries to find some reason that makes sense of it all." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Listen to me," I said. "What that woman did was illegal. It was wrong. And she's going to face consequences for it. I don't want you to waste a single moment wondering if you did something to deserve this, because you didn't." Rebecca put her arm around Maya's shoulders. "Your dad's right," Rebecca said. "And honey, you know your dad's going to make sure this is handled properly. Nobody messes with the police chief's family and gets away with it." I appreciated Rebecca's solidarity, but I also knew that this situation was about to get more complicated. Because once this started moving through the system, it wasn't going to be as simple as me, as a father, making sure she paid. There were procedures. There was paperwork. There were other departments and other eyes that were going to be on this case. And there was going to be blowback. I'd been in law enforcement long enough to know how these things worked. Deborah had friends in the neighborhood. The HOA had other members. And some of them were going to try to spin this narrative. They were going to say that I was abusing my power. They were going to claim that I was targeting her because I was upset about HOA violations on my own property. They were going to try to make this about me. But it wasn't about me. It was about what she did to my daughter. I need to head back to the station, I said, checking the time on my phone. But I want you to know that I'm handling this. I'm going to make sure everything is done by the book, everything is proper, and everything is documented. Dad, Maya said, looking up at me with those eyes that still had tears in them. Is she going to go to jail? That was the question I'd been dreading. The honest answer was complicated. Unlawful restraint and false imprisonment are serious charges, but they're often handled with varying degrees of severity depending on the circumstances, the defendant's record, and a whole host of other factors. Deborah had no criminal history that I was aware of. She wasn't a dangerous person in the traditional sense. She was just someone who had let power go to her head and had crossed a line she shouldn't have. I don't know yet, I told Maya honestly. That's going to depend on a lot of things. But what I do know is that she's going to be held accountable. The legal system is going to make sure of that. I spent another 20 minutes with Maya and Rebecca, making sure they were as okay as they could be given the circumstances. I ordered them dinner from the Italian place Maya likes, and I made Rebecca promise to stay at the house for the evening. I couldn't be there, but I could make sure Maya wasn't alone. Then I drove back to the police station, my mind already shifting into work mode. When I got to the interrogation room, Deborah was sitting at the table looking absolutely terrified. She'd been there for about 40 minutes, and the reality of her situation had clearly started to sink in. I had Detective Marcus Williams, one of my senior detectives, conduct the actual interview. It's protocol, and it's also important to have someone other than me handling it, given the personal nature of the case. I observed from the other side of the glass, watching as Marcus laid out exactly what Maya had told me. The chain. The padlock. The threats. The restraint. Deborah's version of events was almost laughable in its mental gymnastics. According to her, she was just trying to teach the girl a lesson about respecting the rules. She claimed she'd only meant to keep Maya there for a few minutes, as a form of correction. She insisted she hadn't meant any real harm. Marcus leaned back in his chair and just looked at her. Let me make sure I understand, he said, his voice dripping with disbelief. You took it upon yourself to physically restrain a minor to a wheelchair with a chain and padlock without the permission or presence of her parent or guardian, and you did this as a form of punishment for not following HOA rules. Do I have that right? It sounds worse when you say it like that, Deborah said quietly. It sounds exactly like what it is, Marcus replied. You unlawfully restrained a child. That's a crime, Ms. Sinclair. That's not HOA enforcement. That's not discipline. That's a criminal act. I watched her face crumble. For the first time, I think she really understood what she'd done. Not just what she'd done to Maya, but what she'd done legally. She'd committed a felony. After the interview, I sat in my office with the case file in front of me. The documentation was beginning. The wheels were turning. And there was no way to stop them now. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was a message from someone I didn't recognize, but the content made everything crystal clear. Stay out of this, Chief. Deborah Sinclair is one of us. There will be consequences if you push this forward. My hands immediately went numb. That threatening text message was the thread I needed to pull. I handed it over to the cybercrime unit, and they traced it within 24 hours. The number wasn't registered to Deborah. It belonged to a man named Richard Holbrook. He's the treasurer of the HOA board. I'd seen him at neighborhood meetings before, quiet, unassuming, always sitting in the back. When we brought him in for questioning, he lawyered up immediately. But we didn't need him to talk. We had the text. We had the threat. And we had the beginning of a much larger pattern. Detective Williams dug deeper into the HOA records. What he found was staggering. Over the past 3 years, the HOA board had issued over 400 violation notices. Most of them were for subjective things: garden aesthetics, mailbox colors, lawn care practices. But when Williams compared those violations to payment records, a picture emerged. Families who paid their HOA fees on time received violations. Families who questioned the fees or asked for transparency received violations. Families who tried to opt out of certain HOA projects received violations. And families who pushed back against the board received the most violations of all. It was a protection racket, essentially. Pay up, comply, and stay quiet. Or face endless violation notices, fines that escalated, and a hostile environment that made living in the neighborhood unbearable. But it went deeper than that. There were emails between Deborah, Richard, and 2 other board members, Margaret Chen and David Martinez. In those emails, they discussed using intimidation tactics against residents who resisted. They talked about making examples of people. They coordinated their actions to ensure that anyone who stepped out of line would face consequences. And when I started investigating the threat against me, they got nervous. 3 days after the threatening text, I received an anonymous letter at the police station. It was typed, "No return address." Inside was a single sentence: "Drop the charges or we'll make sure everyone knows about your disciplinary hearing from 2015. My blood went cold. In 2015, I'd had a disciplinary hearing. It was nothing major. I'd violated protocol during an investigation, used excessive force that was ruled justified but questionable. It was handled internally, it was resolved, and it was behind me. But it was still a stain on my record. The kind of thing that could be weaponized if someone wanted to damage my credibility. They'd done their homework. They knew my vulnerabilities. I showed the letter to my captain, who immediately notified the district attorney's office. What had started as a simple case of unlawful restraint was now becoming a conspiracy, extortion, and obstruction of justice investigation. The DA assigned a special prosecutor to handle it. Her name is Catherine Walsh, and she doesn't play around. Within a week, she'd expanded the investigation to include all 4 board members. Warrants were issued for their computers and phones. Financial records were subpoenaed. Every transaction, every email, every communication was being examined. Deborah tried to flip on the others. Her lawyer came to us with a deal: she'd testify against Richard, Margaret, and David if we agreed to reduce her charges. But Catherine rejected the deal outright. She wanted all of them to face the full weight of the law. The turning point came on a Wednesday afternoon. Margaret Chen, the board secretary, decided to cooperate. She was terrified. She'd only joined the board because her husband pressured her into it, and she'd become increasingly uncomfortable with what was happening. She had emails, records, everything. She'd documented conversations where Richard and Deborah had discussed using fear and intimidation to maintain control. With Margaret's cooperation, the case became airtight. Within 2 weeks, all 4 board members were arrested and charged. Deborah faced multiple counts including unlawful restraint, false imprisonment, intimidation, extortion, and conspiracy. Richard faced charges for making threats and obstruction of justice. Margaret agreed to a plea deal and became a state's witness. David tried to run, but we caught him at the airport attempting to flee to Mexico. The story made headlines not just locally, but regionally. HOA board operated like criminal syndicate, was one headline. Police chief's disabled daughter victim in HOA corruption case, was another. Some people in the neighborhood were shocked. Others, when they really thought about it, realized that they'd been victims too. They started coming forward with their own stories. Violations that were issued for no reason. Fines that were never explained. Intimidation tactics that had forced them to comply with increasingly unreasonable demands. By the end of the investigation, we'd identified over 50 families who had been victimized by the board's behavior. The DA's office pushed for maximum sentencing. Deborah ended up getting 2 years in prison for the restraint of Maya and an additional 5 years for conspiracy and extortion, sentences running consecutively. Richard got 4 years. David got 3. Margaret, as the witness, got probation and community service. On the day Deborah was sentenced, Maya asked if she could come to the courthouse. I was hesitant. I didn't want to expose her to any more trauma. But she was firm. She wanted to be there. She wanted Deborah to see her face. She wanted to be present for her own justice. When the judge pronounced sentence, Maya was sitting in the gallery, right behind me. Deborah looked at her once, and in that moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Recognition, maybe. Understanding of what she'd done. Shame. After the hearing, Maya and I stood outside the courthouse. It was a bright, clear day. The kind of day that feels like a fresh start. Is it over? Maya asked me. I put my arm around her and pulled her close. The legal part is, I said. Your healing might take longer. But we did this together. You were brave. You told the truth. And justice worked. The HOA was completely dissolved. A new homeowners association was formed with strict oversight and term limits for board members. The neighborhood implemented a review process to prevent any single group from accumulating too much power. It wasn't a perfect ending. No one got their time back. No one got compensated for the fear and stress they'd endured. But there was accountability. There was consequence. And there was the understanding that power, no matter how small, should never be unchecked. I returned to work the following Monday. Some colleagues congratulated me. Others seemed distant, uncomfortable. A few even whispered that I'd been too aggressive, that I'd overstepped. But I didn't care. I'd done my job. I'd protected my daughter. And I'd ensured that a group of people who were abusing their power faced real consequences. That's what the badge means to me. That's what justice should look like. And that's a story I'll never forget. And that's how a simple act of cruelty uncovered a much larger conspiracy. One chain. One locked wheelchair. One moment of abuse of power. That's all it took to expose what had been happening in this neighborhood for years. I don't tell this story to make myself look like a hero. I tell it because what happened to my daughter could happen to anyone. What happened to those 50 other families in my neighborhood is happening right now in neighborhoods across this country. People in positions of power, no matter how small that power is, abusing it. Using it to control others. Using it to enrich themselves or feed their ego. The HOA board operated like a criminal organization. They had a system, they had rules, and they enforced those rules through fear and intimidation. Sound familiar? Because this isn't unique to my neighborhood. This is happening everywhere. But here's what I learned through this entire process. The system works. It's slow. It's frustrating. It requires patience and documentation and persistence. But it works. When you have evidence, when you have witnesses willing to testify, when you have lawyers and prosecutors who care about justice, the system works. Maya is back to spending time on the porch. She paints out there now. She draws. She's reclaimed that space, and she's not afraid anymore. That took time. That took therapy and support and love. But she got there. I still see Deborah's empty house sometimes when I drive through the neighborhood. It's for sale now. No one wants to buy it. Her name is synonymous with what happened. She'll serve her time, she'll be released eventually, and she'll have to carry that with her for the rest of her life. That's consequence. That's what happens when you cross certain lines. Richard Holbrook is serving his sentence in a federal penitentiary 2 states away. David Martinez is doing the same. Margaret Chen completed her community service and has actually become an advocate for homeowner rights. She speaks at community meetings now about how to prevent what happened in her neighborhood from happening elsewhere. Deborah will be eligible for parole in 18 months. I don't know if she'll be granted it. That's not my decision anymore. My part is done. But I want to say something to anyone watching this who has experienced something similar. Whether it's an HOA, a landlord, an employer, a teacher, or anyone else in a position of authority over you, if they're abusing that authority, you don't have to accept it. You don't have to stay quiet. You don't have to live in fear. Document everything. Keep records. Tell someone you trust. Go to the authorities. Make noise. Be heard. The reason I'm telling this story is because I want others to know that justice is possible. That accountability is possible. That standing up for yourself and your family is not just worth it, it's necessary. My daughter is remarkable. She always has been. But she showed me something during this whole ordeal that I'll never forget. She showed me that you can be hurt, you can be victimized, and you can still stand up and face your abuser in court and demand justice. That's bravery. To anyone dealing with HOA issues, neighborhood conflicts, or authority abuse right now, reach out. Talk to your city council. Talk to your local law enforcement. Talk to a lawyer. There are resources available. There are people who will listen. You're not alone in this. Maya asked me the other day if there was anything she'd learned from this experience that she was grateful for. And after thinking about it, she said she'd learned that sometimes being vulnerable isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the strongest thing you can do. She's right. This story is over. Justice has been served. The people responsible are facing consequences. The neighborhood has a chance to rebuild with new leadership and new policies designed to protect residents instead of exploit them. But your story might just be beginning. If you're in a situation where someone is abusing their power over you, don't wait. Don't hope it gets better on its own. Don't convince yourself that you're overreacting. Trust your instincts. Document the abuse. Report it. Follow through. Because everyone deserves to feel safe in their own home. Everyone deserves to have their rights respected. And no one, not even someone in an HOA vest, has the right to chain you down. Stay safe out there. And if you see something wrong, say something. That's what I did. And in the end, it made all the difference. This is where the story ends. But remember, there are thousands of stories like this happening right now. Some of them are ending. Some of them are just beginning. Make sure yours ends with justice.